To check out all our products, go to musicnomadcare.com. Hey, it's Rand with Music Nomad. This video is designed to show you how to set up your guitar using Music Nomad's Keep It Simple setup method. The KISS process uses our precision gauges and tools combined with step-by-step general guidelines anybody can follow and set up their guitar to play and sound great. To get the job done right, you will need our 6-piece precision gauge set that includes a truss rod gauge and pick capo, string action gauge, radius gauge set, nut height gauge, and a 24-page instructional booklet. All of these uniquely designed to make the process much easier and precise than other gauges out there. The 3 Music Nomad tool sets are a 26-piece Guitar Tech screwdriver and wrench set, 11-piece truss rod wrench set, and a diamond-coated nut file set. With these 4 kits, you are able to set up most all guitar and basses out there. Before you get started on your setup, there are some pre-setup steps you should do. Remove all your strings with the Music Nomad grip cutter. With the strings now off, and with the Music Nomad radius gauge, measure and make a note of the fretboard radius, as you will need this info when you measure the string radius in the setup process. Tighten all screws, including the tuning machine bushings, with Music Nomad's Guitar Tech tool set. Polish your frets with Music Nomad's Fine Fret Polish. Clean and condition the fretboard with Music Nomad's F1 oil. Clean the body and neck with Music Nomad cleaners. Finally, put new strings on with Music Nomad's grip winder. Okay, now you're ready to start the setup, featuring our talented guest guitar tech who will lead you through the process. Have fun.
Hi, Jeff with San Francisco Guitar Works and Sonoma County Guitar Works, here today to set up this beautiful red Fender Telecaster 3-saddle bridge. With the goal of making setups accessible to everyone, my collaboration with Music Nomad has created a simple setup process to help you make your guitar play and sound great. So let's get started. So I know Rand has already walked you through the pre-setup process of giving your guitar the Music Nomad spa treatment, getting a fresh set of strings on, and bringing it up to pitch. So at this point, we will begin the setup process using the Keep It Simple setup gauge kit, the Music Nomad screwdriver set, the truss rod wrench set, and the Music Nomad diamond coated nut files. So again, like I said, today we'll be using a 3-saddle Telecaster, which has its own set of unique issues using the 3-saddle bridge. When we get to intonation, you'll see that we'll have to split the difference on some of the intonation points because you have 2 strings sharing a common saddle. So unlike a 6-saddle bridge where you can intonate every saddle perfectly, or every string perfectly, on this you may have to make one a little flat and one a little sharp due to the fact that they share a common saddle. But we will see when we get there. So the general flow that we'll use today, we'll start with our neck relief, we'll move on into our bridge action height and radius, then we will move up to the nut, we'll cut our nut slots correctly, and then we'll move down to the bridge, set our intonation points, and then we will balance our pickups as our last step. So using that set of steps, you should find that the setup broken down into those pieces is very easy to follow and very simple whenever you break it down. We have a very linear process where we set one parameter and then that is not impacted by the following steps. So once we set our neck relief, we're good on that. We can move into our bridge. It doesn't impact our relief setting. Once we've set our bridge, we can cut the nut, which doesn't impact the bridge, and so on and so forth. We've really tried to make the setup straightforward and easy to follow. So hopefully you will find this video informative and it'll help you get your guitar to the point where it plays and sounds great for you. First step, let's measure our neck relief. Now what is relief? So relief is the amount of curvature in the fretboard from front to back. With the guitar laying on its back like this, if the neck was bowed like a hammock, you would say that the neck has a lot of relief. It would have a big bow in it. If the neck is dead flat, where you put a straight edge on it and it touches every fret, then the neck would have no relief. And if the neck is bent backwards, then it would have back bow. So why do we need relief? Relief is important on a guitar neck because it creates some clearance for the string to vibrate and oscillate. The string basically vibrates in an oval pattern fixed at the nut and at the bridge saddle. So when you pluck it, the center of the string oscillates in a wider arc than the rest of the string. So with a little bit of curvature in the neck, you create some clearance for that string to vibrate without hitting the frets, and you can have a much more even action from the first fret to the last fret. How is relief governed? How do you adjust relief? Well, you do that using the truss rod. So if you tighten the truss rod, you take relief out of the neck. If you loosen the truss rod, you introduce relief into the neck. So the first thing we'll do is we'll measure that and see where we are. So I will use my MusicNomad pick capo to hold down my low E string at the first fret. So I'll put it over my E string, under my A, and over my D. Just slide it across, and now it's holding down that string at the first fret, so I don't have to do it. I'm going to put the guitar into the playing position, which is how we'll do all of our measurements. If you have your guitar like this, and then you turn it like this, the headstock actually falls backward a few thousandths of an inch, and if you put it on the cradle cube, you're actually pushing it forward. So you really, the only accurate way to take your measurements is in the playing position. So I like to just set the waist of the guitar on the bench, makes it really easy to hold. And now I've got my low E string held down at the first fret. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my truss rod gauge. This is a really handy little gauge. This is part of the Keep It Simple setup kit. This is 3 different feeler gauges, 6 thousandths of an inch, 8 thousandths of an inch, and 10 thousandths of an inch thick. The 6 thousandths is used for electric guitar, the 8 thousandths is for acoustic guitar or bass, and the 10 thousandths is used for classical. How did we come up with these numbers? We have done, at San Francisco Guitar Works, I've done literally thousands of setups, probably tens of thousands at this point. And we've had a plec machine for several years, and we have done thousands of fret levels with the plec. And we found that a guitar, an electric guitar with around 6 thousandths of an inch relief in the neck plays the most evenly and the most comfortably for most players. Now, if you have a very heavy attack, maybe you'd want to go up in relief a little bit. If you have a very light attack, maybe you could go a little bit less, but it's a really good starting point for just a nice playing all-around guitar. So we're going to use that for our electric guitar measurement for the relief setting. What's cool about these gauges is you only have the gauges you need. They're not greasy like the gauges you might buy down at the auto parts store. And there are instructions on the handle to remind you of how to use them if you forget. So the way that I'll use this is I'm going to fret my low E string at the 12th fret, and I've now created a straight edge between the 1st fret and the 12th fret using the low E string. So I can look quickly and just push down at the 6th fret. I'm going to measure the gap between the 6th fret and the string. So I can right now just see if I have any space, and I have almost no space between the string and the 6th fret. So this guitar needs relief. So I will measure, I'll go ahead and measure just to see, but yeah, I'm moving the string pretty massively with the gauge. So that shows that I have a medium to high touch on the gauge. And if I look at my legend here on the handle, if I have a medium to high touch, I'm going to turn my truss rod nut counterclockwise to put more relief in the neck. Now on this Telecaster, it's a little tricky because we've got our truss rod adjustment is at the heel. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. Sometimes you can pull the pick guard off, and there should be a little route here in front of the truss rod nut, and if the pickup is low enough, sometimes you can get a screwdriver in there to turn it. But I can't tell you how many Teles I've seen come in with a dent in the pickup cover because somebody has tried to avoid pulling the neck off, has jammed a screwdriver in there to try to adjust the truss rod, and has dented the pickup cover. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this neck off, and I'm going to adjust the truss rod and then put the neck back on. So the way that I like to do this, I like to use a capo at the 1st or 2nd fret just to hold the strings on, because I'm going to loosen them. And if you have a capo on, sometimes you can keep them from all falling off. if they all fall off, they tend to get tangled, and it just takes longer to do the whole operation. But I'm going to go ahead and loosen the strings. Okay, and then in my screwdriver kit, I'm going to grab my extension and a number 2 Phillips screwdriver head. I can pull the guitar up. I'm going to loosen the neck screws. Now sometimes you can loosen these screws and just tilt the neck backwards without taking the neck all the way off. So I'm going to try that. If the holes in the body are loose, then you can often do that. Just saves you a couple of minutes. But if not, we're going to go ahead and just take the neck all the way off the guitar. So with the screws loosened pretty well, sometimes you can just bend the neck back just like I did right there and get enough clearance to get in there and adjust that truss rod. But I just feel like I'm going to be too close to that pickup, and I'm going to go ahead and just pull the whole neck off. Okay, so now I've got the neck loosened up, and in my MusicNomad truss rod wrench kit, I've got a large 3/8 flat blade that I'm going to use to adjust the truss rod nut. So I can go ahead and put that into my screwdriver handle, and turning my guitar around, I can pull the neck off, lay the body down, and I'm trying to just keep a little tension on the strings to keep them from all flying off the headstock. If you can't and they fly off, you know, no biggie. But so what I'm going to do is put my screwdriver into the truss rod nut, and I'm just going to back that off a little bit. I'm just going to make an educated guess that that's about right. So now that I've done that, the neck goes back on, and then back on goes the neck. So by loosening that truss rod nut, I lengthened the truss rod, and it's going to allow the neck to be pulled into more of a bow by the string tension. So that's going to introduce more relief into the neck, and hopefully, if I got lucky, we'll measure it out and it'll be 6/1000 right on the money. Okay. Now back to pitch. As you can see, the capo kept the strings from loosening up and flying off of all the tuners, so saves me a little bit of time and frustration on that. So when you put your neck back on, you're going to want to just look and make sure that your center line's correct. Fender necks usually have a little bit of slop side to side. You can push them one way or the other, which will cause the strings to move from one side of the neck to the other. So you can just take a look, make sure that you're good on your center line. I'm a little off to the treble side, so I'm going to pull that over just a touch, retighten those screws. Now we'll get it tuned to pitch. Okay, so now capo back in, guitar back into playing position. Oh yeah, I've got a lot more relief now. So I'm going to go ahead and measure that and see where I got. So I have my 6th fret. That is exactly 6/1000. I have no space between the gauge and the string, so the educated guess was right on the money. So I now have 6/1000 of an inch relief in the neck. So having done that, we can move on into our bridge saddle adjustments, or the first part of that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set our outer 2 E string action heights. So if you get out your string action gauge, you will see on here you have one side is in inches and one side is in millimeters. A couple of things about this gauge though that I particularly like. The white on black is really easy to see. My eyes, you know, as I'm getting older, it's getting a little harder to see. The black on gray, which is pretty common on a lot of the setup gauges, the action gauges. And we have a very handy reference chart for action heights for electric guitar, acoustic guitar, and bass. Like I said, both SAE and metric. So I'm going to use our SAE chart, and I'm going to look at our most common electric guitar action height, which is marked with an asterisk That is going to be our low medium, which is 60 thousandths of an inch high on the bass side and 50 thousandths of an inch high on the treble side. And I'll go ahead and show you how to measure that now. We'll be using the scale along the bottom edge of the gauge. It starts at 10 thousandths of an inch and it goes up to 140 thousandths of an inch. So in order to use the gauge, I'm going to put my 20 thousandths line right on the 12th fret, and I can see that's well below the string. As I move my gauge to the left, the lines are getting closer and closer to the bottom of the string. So I'm moving it over, I'm at 50 thou, I can still see that, 60, 70. So this string is sitting right on top of the 70 thousandths line. So that means that this low E string is 70 thousandths of an inch away from the fret. So that's a little higher than we want by about 10 thousandths of an inch. I'm going to go ahead and measure my treble string too while I'm here. And that is also sitting around 70 thousandths. 65 actually. It's covering the 70 line, so that's 5 thousandths less, so it's 65 thousandths. So that's about 15 thousandths higher than I want it to be. So I'm going to need to lower these down. So in order to do that, on this guitar I'm going to need a 50 thousandths of an inch Allen wrench. So I can find that in my Tech screwdriver kit. It's a .050. And the way that these saddles work is the screw goes through the saddle, and as you loosen the screw, the saddle lowers down towards the bridge. As you tighten the screw, the saddle raises up away from the bridge. So in order to lower my action, I'm going to loosen the screw, which will lower the string towards the bridge. So I'm just going to back this out a little bit, put the guitar back into the playing position, and remeasure. Almost there. That's about 60, 62, 63. All right, so that's 60 thousandths right on the money. Now I'm going to go ahead and measure this one again. I'm sitting at about 65. So I'm going to drop my high E string down and get that down to 50. So there we go. So now that I have my outer two string heights set at 60 thousandths and 50 thousandths, I'm going to go ahead and just play those real quick and make sure that that the string is playing cleanly enough at that action height. So just on the low E, you can play however you like. If you have a pick, if you finger pick, however you want to do it. You just want to make sure that your notes are playing cleanly. And this is a vintage Fender neck radius, so it's a 7 1/4, which is pretty tight. And what is commonly a limiter on how low you can get your action is, can you bend a note? Because with the really round radius, as you bend your string up, it runs into the hump in the middle of the neck and it can fret out. So this guitar at 50 thousandths, that's kind of getting to the limit of how low you can have a vintage radius action set before it chokes out on bend. So I'm going to bend some notes and see, yeah, this one is definitely choking out at that action height. So if you don't bend, it doesn't matter. But if you bend at all, that's not going to work. I mean, David Gilmour could never play this guitar. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the action up a little bit on that high E string until I get a little bit cleaner bend. I'm just going to bring it up 5 thousandths of an inch. So now I'm up about 55, maybe right at 60. Almost a whole step, which, I mean, I think a whole step is kind of the minimum. This guitar, it's choking a little unevenly, so I suspect this guitar probably needs a fret level and dress, but we're going to work around it because that's part of the setup process. So now I've brought it up to right at 60, and we'll... So that just gets me a whole step. So I'm gonna leave it there. But at this point, I definitely would call, if this was a customer's guitar, I would definitely call and say, hey, do you need a fret? Do you want a fret level? Are you okay with a little higher action? Because this is starting to feel a little high on the high side. But you know, again, part of learning to navigate the setup is learning how to work around the specific idiosyncrasies of different guitar models and learning how to work around imperfections that might be present in the fret plane. So, so that's where we're going to leave this one. So we ended up at 60 and 60 rather than 60 and 50. So not too bad, but a little higher than I probably would have wanted it. So now we've got our outer two E strings set. I'm going to tune back to pitch because I did lower that, lower those saddles. Now that I'm back in tune, I'm going to set my inner four strings with the radius gauge. So typically you would want to set your bridge radius to match your fretboard radius. So this is a 7 1/4 inch board, so I would use a 7 1/4 inch radius gauge to set the bridge. So I'll get out my, my radius gauge. Got my 7 1/4 right here. So the reading, sometimes taking these measurements can be a little bit tricky. You know, you're probably not used to looking for tiny gaps in your daily life like we're going to be looking for during the setup process. But what I found is in designing these gauges, the new MusicNomad radius gauges, using the black was very helpful in being able to see the gap between the string and the gauge, and also having our having all of our numbers and lettering on in white was very good for contrast, being able to easily read them. And you also have a couple of reminders on here about your string radius equals your fretboard radius, where to measure. There is you can look on musicnomadcare.com how-to advice, and there's a database of all the common fretboard radius that's used by most major manufacturers. So if for some reason, you know, your strings are already on and you can't easily measure it, you can just check out the database and you can get your fretboard radius on there. Now the way that you'll set your radius is you'll put the radius gauge on the strings about 1/4 inch in front of the bridge. Now I have a slight, well actually this is clearing the ashtray, so I'm okay. Sometimes on a Telecaster, the ashtray around the bridge will keep you from being able to set your radius gauge on the strings. The radius gauge will actually hit the sides of the ashtray, so you would have to come up past the ashtray to get your gauge on the strings. But this one, it's working okay. Saddles are high enough. So the way that I like to look at the radius gauge is I typically I hold the guitar up like this and I look down the strings. And then what I'm looking for is I'm just looking for any gaps between the string and the radius gauge. If you are having a hard time seeing those gaps, something that you can do is just very gently bounce the gauge up and down, rest it on the strings, and then just very gently push it down and up, and you'll be able to see what strings are moving and what strings are not. So the strings that are moving are obviously touching the gauge, and the ones that are not are too low, so you'd need to raise them up. Third way to check it out is to gently rest the gauge on the strings and then pluck each string and listen. So I've got my low E is hitting, my A is hitting, my D is not, my G is not, my B is not, and my high E is. So I need to raise my D, G, and B strings up to reach the gauge. So to do that, I will use my 50 thousandths Allen wrench, just like I did on setting my action height. So I'm going to go ahead and raise up my saddle that carries my D and the G. I'm going to tighten my screws here just a little bit. And I'm going to put my gauge back on. And bouncing it up and down, I'm almost there on the D, and I need to go a little more on the G. So I'm going to raise up that G side. The trick with 3 saddle bridges is you've got 2 strings per saddle. So if you have your D perfectly on the gauge, but your G is really low, as you raise that G up, it's going to raise the D a little bit. So you might have to lower the D. You might have to go back and forth a little bit to get that radius perfect. We might have to do the same thing with our, as we do the intonation, you'll see, you'll have to kind of split the difference based on those 2 strings per saddle. So I'm perfect on my D and G now, but my B is a little bit low, so I'm going to want to raise that up. And that might raise my high E action just a touch, so I'll remeasure, and if it does, I can bring it back down, because with those strings being on the same saddle. All right, now that is right on the money. So I'm going to go ahead and just remeasure that high E, make sure I'm still sitting at 60, Yep, looks good. So now I'll tune back to pitch. Everything's going to be a little bit sharp because I raised my strings up. So at this point, you have set your neck relief, your bridge action height on the outer two strings, then you've set your inner four strings to correspond to your fretboard radius. So at this point, you'd want to take a minute and play the instrument up and down the neck to make sure that your fretted notes are playing cleanly. We still haven't cut the nut, so if it feels a little high or it's a little buzzy open, we're not quite there yet. But this is the time when you would just go through and just play, listen for any choked notes, make sure the action is comfortable for how you like to play, and then you would be ready to move on. If you find it's a little buzzy, you can raise the action up another 5 thousandths and give that a try. If you find it feels a little stiff, you can lower it down 5 thousandths and see if that helps to make the guitar more comfortable. The good thing about using the measuring gauges is that you can go in steps. You can decide, okay, I'm at 60-50 and it's a little buzzy. I'm going to go to 55-45 and try that, rather than just, well, I'm just going to lower it some amount and you don't really know what you did. So you can go a certain amount and you can always go back to where you started if you find, well, that made it worse. I want to get back to where I was. So now we've set our neck relief, our action height, our bridge radius, and now it's time to move down to the nut and cut the nut slots correctly. So the nut is a very small part of the guitar, but it is very important. It governs many things. It governs tuning stability, intonation in the low registers, playing feel, how comfortable the guitar is to play, cleanliness of note, resonance on the open strings. It's really important to have the nut cut correctly. So what we're going to do is we're going to first measure our nut heights, which is measuring the gap between the string and the first fret. So to do that, we will use our nut height gauge, and this is very similar to the Truss Rod gauge. It's a very clean little tool. It has the most common nut heights that you'll find on acoustic guitar, electric guitar, bass, classical in here, clearly labeled for what string they're used on. And on the handle, you have a legend that instructs you on how to use the tool depending on whether the gap between the fret and the string is too big, too small, or right on the money. So what we're going to do is put the guitar back in the playing position, and I'm going to find what gauge corresponds to the low E string on an electric guitar. And this happens to be 20 thousandths of an inch. So the way we have come to these numbers is similar to the Truss Rod gauge. Having set up thousands and thousands of guitars, we know that most players will not tolerate any open string buzz. So we want to make sure that we have enough gap between the first fret and the string that it doesn't buzz open. But we don't want to have it so high that it's not comfortable or that the intonation is off. So 20 thousandths is a really good, comfortable, safe action for your nut height for the E and the A string. Then you can drop down to 18 thousandths high on the D and the G, and then down to 16 on the B and the E. So if you find that you're measuring your nut heights and they're lower than what we specify, but they're not buzzing open, then don't worry about it. You're going to have a good, comfortable action at the first fret. And the only real problem with nut height is if it's too low and it buzzes. So we'll go ahead and measure our low E string first. And I'm going to just put the gauge in between the string and the fret. And I can see I've got a really big gap between the string and the first fret. So this is probably 25 thousandths or something. It's very stiff. No fun to play. So while I'm here, I'll go ahead and measure my A string, and I am also high on the A string. Not quite as bad as the E, but pretty bad. So I'm going to go ahead and cut both of those down. I'll just do them one at a time, but I will need to cut both of them. So what I'll do is get out my, my file that's sized correctly for my string. Now, picking out your nut files is a really important step in getting your guitar set up done correctly. You're going to want to use a file that is the same size as the string you're cutting for, or 3 to 4 thousandths of an inch bigger. You don't want to go much larger than that. The string slot gets too big, it gets sloppy, the string can vibrate in the nut slot, and it's not tight and correctly cut. If you go smaller than the gauge you're cutting for, you can have an issue with the string binding in the nut, and that causes tuning issues because as you tune your guitar to pitch, the nut is pinching the string and it will either not allow it to tune smoothly or it will hold the string too tight in the nut, and as you play, the string goes sharp as it vibrates and moves its way through the nut. So making sure the nut is cut correctly is really important. Now, I've used a lot of nut files over the years, like every nut file that you can get. And the ones that we've designed with MusicNomad I think are far superior to any that I've used. The diamond coating cuts a really smooth nut slot, so the tendency for a string to bind in the slot or to jump on ridges that might be present in the bottom of the slot is really minimized. You don't have to do any sandpaper work after you cut the slots or anything. They cut very smoothly. These also come in a handle, but you can use them outside of the handle if you want. If you have a clearance issue, you can pop the blade out and just use the handle. Just use the blade. I use them back and forth. I don't really have a preference. Depends on what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this in the handle for now. So the way that I'm going to cut the nut is I like to stand over the guitar like this so I can see down on the nut. And I'm going to cut in line with the string. I'm also going to cut, I'm not going to drift it to the right or the left. I'm going to cut straight down so I maintain my string spacing. I will also cut down at an angle towards the headstock. Being a Fender, it has a shelf behind the nut, and it's really easy to cut at too steep of an angle and mar that shelf. To prevent cutting into the nut shelf, you just need to keep the right angle, but there is a trick you can use to at least give you a warning if you're cutting at too steep of an angle. If you can grab a piece of masking tape and then find a little something that'll slide between the strings and the headstock. This Truss Rod gauge is going to work just fine for that. Put the end of the tape right on your gauge. Push the gauge under the strings, and then you can put that piece of masking tape on the nut shelf behind the nut. And again, that's not going to prevent you from cutting into the nut shelf, but it will at least give you a little bit of warning. If you scuff that tape, you can know, okay, I got to drop my angle a little bit. All right, so I'm going to down tune my string and pop it out of the nut slot. And I will go ahead and I have a properly sized file for my 46 gauge string. I'm going to get in here, just open that up a little bit. And I'm going to pretend like I've never cut a nut before. And I saw a little bit of dust, so I'm going to remeasure now. I don't know how much I cut off. It could have been 2 thou, it could have been 20 thou. I don't know. So I'm going to take it easy here, and I'm going to remeasure. So back in the playing position, and I've still got a gap. So I'm definitely going to go more down on that. And again, these files cut really smooth and consistently. So if you keep the same angle, you can count on the same amount of material being removed every time. So I know if I do, about 4 strokes, I went down a couple of thousandths, and I know what to expect as far as material removal. Okay, that is right on the money. It's just fitting right between the gap and the string, right between the fret and the string, just perfectly fills the gap. Okay, so now I'm going to measure my A string. So I'm going to come under the E, and I'm going to go under the A, and I have no touch between the gauge and the string. So I didn't show you this on the E string, but I will now use my legend on the handle. And what I have, so if I have no touch, I'm going to file the nut. And so then I get down to yes. When I get it to the appropriate height, it'll say yes on the touch between the gauge and the string. And if I have no fret buzz, I'm good to go. So right now I'm in no touch, so I'm going to file the nut. Saw a little dust there, so I know I removed some material. That's the thing about cutting nut slots. You don't want to go crazy hard, but you've got to see some material come off. If you just sit there and just barely touch it, you know, you'll never make it. So you want to do just enough to see some material come off, but don't go hog wild. All right, so I still have a little bit of a gap, so I'm going to file the nut. All right, that got us there. So now I'll drop down to my 18, which is for the D string and the G string. That is very high. So for the 26 gauge D string, I'm going to use a 28 gauge file. It's 0.02 of an inch bigger, which is well within the tolerance that we would want for the proper size file. So I'm going to go in here and pull my string out of the way. File that. Back to the playing position. Almost, just a tiny bit more. I think that should do it. Yep, right on the money. So now I'll go ahead and measure the G using that same gauge at an 18 thousandths, and I have a lot of space there. And if you go a little bit under the recommended height, if it's not buzzing, don't worry about it. That's the critical issue, is open string buzz. If you don't have it, then your strings are still sufficient height. So now I'll go down to my 16 thousandths gauge, and I will check out my B string, and I've got quite a bit of height there. So I'm going to grab my 13 file and cut that down. All right, let's remeasure. Okay, that looks good. Now my E string, which is a 10, I've got quite a bit of gap there. Now that's perfect. So if you're a really light player, you might be able to drop down a gauge and go 18, 16, 14. You know, I've been able to cut some high E's depending on the player down to 10 thousandths of an inch. So you got some little bit of wiggle room, but these are a really good starting point. The guitar is going to play completely comfortably in tune. You shouldn't have any open string fret buzz. I mean, you can make anything buzz if you hit it hard enough, but it should be very clean and comfortable. All right, so now we have we've set our relief curve properly. We've set our outer E strings action height and our inner 4 strings bridge radius. We've cut the nut slots to the correct height, and we are now ready to intonate the bridge. So intonation is the process of making the fretted notes play in tune with the open strings. This is done by adjusting the saddles forward or backward. The amount of forward or backward adjustment is called compensation. Now, the reason that we need to do that is because when we push our string down to fret a note, it's raising the tension of the string and it's raising the pitch. So to get around that, what we do is we compensate for that pitch shift by moving the saddles backwards and lengthening the scale, which lowers the pitch of the fretted note, compensating for the increase in tension, which raises the pitch. So what we'll do is, first things first, you're going to want to make sure your guitar is perfectly in tune. This is the time when it's really critical, and we'll go string by string. So we'll make sure our low E is perfectly in tune. Then what I will do is I will fret at the 12th fret and at the 17th fret, and I will see if those fretted notes are in tune with the open string. Now if they're not, they're going to be either sharp or flat. If the fretted note is flat, we're going to move our saddle forward towards the neck in order to shorten the scale and raise the pitch of the note. If our fretted notes are sharp, we're going to move the saddle back to flatten the note relative to the open string. So first things first, get our E string tuned correctly. If you have a tuner that's particularly jumpy, a couple of things that you can do to minimize that: make sure your volume's all the way up. You can turn on both of your pickups and roll down your tone control, and that helps to minimize the harmonics that the tuner sees, and sometimes it'll help the tuner really lock in. You can see that tuner is really stable now. Okay, so now we have our low E string open, perfectly in tune, and I'm going to fret our 12th fret. It's pretty good. In fact, that's quite good. And then I'll check our 17th, which that's also very good. So our low E string is in good shape. So now I'll move to the A string and check it out. That's really well in tune. We're sharp on the 12th fret, and we're sharp on the 17th fret. I'm going to go ahead and pull the saddle back to flatten the A string a little bit. So this needs a Phillips screwdriver. So I'll get over here into my screwdriver kit and get a number 1 Phillips. And depending on how much down tension there is on the saddle, I will loosen the strings in order to make it a little bit easier to pull that saddle back. Sometimes on Telecasters, the saddle screw will be, if the saddle's high, the screw will be at a pretty severe angle coming out of the bridge plate, and it can be hard to access that screw. So we need to just make sure that the saddle is pretty loose. I'm just going to put on maybe a 1 turn. We'll take it back to pitch. Now I stretch my strings just to make sure they don't drift while I'm intonating. It's really good. It's very good on the E string, both 12th and 17th. Now the A. Oh yeah, that made it much less sharp. I'm going to go ahead and take it back about another half turn though, because I'm still really good on my E, but I'm still a little bit sharp on my A. So now we're just barely cheating flat on that E string. Here goes our A, and we're right on the money on that A now. So I was able to bring the A string in without really affecting the E too much. So now we're right on the money on our E and our A. So I'm going to move over to the D and check it out. Tiny bit sharp on both the 12th and 17th. So now I'll measure my G. If they're both sharp, you definitely need to move them back. If one's sharp and one's flat, probably just leave it alone. But I'll take this back about a half turn. It's really good on that D. Tiny bit sharp, nothing to really worry too much about. And then really right on the money on that G. I'm going to call that good. The G's barely flat on that 17th fret, so I feel like we're splitting the difference pretty well on those two strings. So now on over to the B and the E. It's perfect on there. Pretty much a little bit flat on the 17th, a little flat on that E string, tiny bit flat on the 17th fret. I'm going to go ahead and move the saddle forward just a bit to eliminate that flatness on the high E. So I'm going to back out this screw to let that saddle move forward just a bit. Tune it back to pitch. It's just barely sharp. Still really good. And then that made that E perfect. So we actually got all 6 strings almost perfect, even though we're operating with a 3 saddle bridge. So even if you don't have a compensated set of saddles, you know, with just a standard 3 saddle bridge, you can get it really close. If you just pay careful attention to splitting the difference and making one a little flat, one a little sharp, you'll be able to play chords, you know, all the way up the neck that sound very well in tune. So you should be able to get it dialed right in. All right, so we have set our neck relief, outer string action, bridge radius, cut the nut slots correctly, and set our intonation. So the playability side of the setup is done. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to set our pickup height. On page 21, we've got our pickup height suggestions. These are really good starting points. You may find that you need to adjust one of your pickups up or down from there. depending on how your pickups balance with one another. But on a Telecaster, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set, with my strings fretted at the last fret, I'm going to set my bridge pickup 3/32 of an inch away from the strings, from the outer two strings. And then I'm going to set my neck pickup at 1/16. To adjust the pickups on a Tele, you have, the bridge pickups are always the same like this. You've got 3 screws in the that go through the bridge plate, and those screws screw into the pickup base plate. And then between the base plate and the bridge plate are springs or pieces of surgical tubing. So as you tighten these 3 screws, it lifts the pickup up. So you can adjust the side-to-side tilt with the 2 screws on the back side, and then on your front side you have 1 screw, and you can adjust how even the pickup bob and top is with the string angle. So you have kind of 3 different adjustments. On the neck pickup, there are 2 styles. This is the style that is body mounted, so I have to pull the pick guard off in order to access the adjustment screws. And what you do is you tighten the screws to lower the pickup, you loosen the screws to raise the pickup. The other type is hung from the pick guard. So you would have a screw head on either side of the pickup, and you would adjust that the same as you do the bridge pickup. You would tighten the screw to raise the pickup, you would loosen the screw to lower the pickup. So the first thing I'm going to do is just measure where I am. On my string action gauge, I have a pickup height ruler in the corner here. I'm going to use inches. This is graduated in 30 seconds, and it's marked in eighths. So for my bridge pickup, I'm going to go 3/32, and so I can put this on here. That is way too tight. That is about a 1/16 and even less on the treble side. So let me grab myself a flat blade screwdriver. Lower that pickup down. If you're trying to lower your pickup and it doesn't want to go down, you could have worn out surgical tubing pushing the pickup down. So it could be that basically the surgical tubing that's acting as a spring has just lost its ability to push the pickup. So you may have to pull your bridge and put new surgical tubing on, or just use springs, which really work better over the long haul. So now I've got this dropped down. Let's see where I am. So that's right at 332 on my treble side, and I'm right at 332 on my bass side. So now let me measure my neck pickup. It's a little over a 1/16, and it's well over a 1/16 on the treble side. So I'm going to need to go ahead and pull this pick guard off. All right, so this just comes up, pops out and slides out from under the strings, and it takes a flat blade screwdriver. So I'm going to loosen these screws and raise the pickup up a little bit. All right, that's right at a 1/16. So I'll turn on the amp and we'll give it a quick listen and see where we are with our volume. Neck. It's actually very well balanced. So if you find that your pickup is too loud, you just want to go ahead and lower it. If you find that it's too quiet, you're going to want to raise it or lower the other pickup. A couple of just tone tips. If you find that your pickup is muddy or kind of woofy sounding, you can lower the bass side and raise the treble side to keep kind of an even volume output. So what I'll do now is I'll just go ahead and put my pick guard back on. Just slides back under the strings. It's a nice thing about the gauge kit. You can use the clamshell as a handy little parts catcher. So now we've gone through the entire setup process on this 3-saddle Telecaster: neck relief, bridge setup, nut cutting, intonation, and pickup adjustment. Hopefully this video has been instructional in how to not only navigate the Telecaster and learn a little bit more about the parts that make it unique, but also how to use the Keep It Simple setup method to make the setup something that you can easily navigate on your own. The gauges are really easy to use. The process is very simple and straightforward. And there's a wealth of online resources on the MusicNomad website if you have any questions or have any trouble with any of the steps.
For detailed videos on how to use each gauge during the setup process, please visit musicnomadcare.com for all our how-to videos.